We're discussing a book that I find both incredibly cool and creepily relevant. So I'm going to get right to it. But before I get into the specifics, what I wanted to ask you, Janina, is everybody loves some period of history more than they love the other. And you're not just an academic, right? You're also a television presenter. But so what about the Middle Ages spoke to you the most that you felt that this is the period that I need to focus on?
Thank you for that excellent question. Thank you for having me here. And thank you to these remarkable women that have come along. I hope I can entertain you and say something that you can take back with you as well. But this is a remarkable opportunity to be able to talk to you about my new book. I am a medievalist, and that means I study that 1,000 years of history from about 500 CE through to about 1,500. That's a millennium of history. It's an awful lot. But we tend to sort of see it as a bridge between things, the ancient civilizations, and then the modern world. And everything in between is dark and brutish and short and awful. I don't think that at all. I became really inspired by the literature. So I started off studying this dramatic poetry like Beowulf, which is alliterative and strong. And then I got really intrigued by art, by the art of the period. And I think this is something that I still feel passionately about. We tend to talk about artworks as being paintings, sculptures, things in galleries.
Yeah.
But actually, in the medieval period, much of it, more of it, is crafts.
Yeah.
Crafts working, creating things with your hands that are the finest things that hands can make. And as a medieval art historian, I'm drawn to that. I'm drawn to the beauty of human creativity.
Yeah.
And so it's just, and also it's the underdog. I love a historical underdog.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm a medievalist.
So in Legenda, you're sort of carrying on from Femina, which was your work preceding this. And in the conclusion of Femina, which is also the history of the Middle Ages through women written out of it, in your conclusion also you've mentioned that the door is open for another book on the period. So I wanted to ask, who's the one woman who stood out to you in Femina that made you go like, okay, another book needs to be written on this subject?
That's an excellent question. Femina was an important book for me because I thought I was just saying the obvious, which is women's histories have been erased and written out, and women's contributions to the past have been basically transformed over centuries to be almost non-existent. I thought that was obvious, but it seems it wasn't. But one figure that because I'm Polish-Irish, and I knew I wanted to write about a Polish woman. And in Poland, there's this incredible figure, Jadwiga. Now, she was known as King, not Queen, King Jadwiga. And she became a rallying point. When Poland didn't exist on a map for 180 years, her tomb in the cathedral, this tomb of a medieval woman, became a place where revolutionaries, thinkers, philosophers, they'd all come together and meet around this woman, around the remains of this woman. And I thought, well, maybe that's happened in other places. And the more I started to look, each nation has its legends, but they're not written up truthfully. So I wanted to get to the truth behind these women.
And I think, first of all, you've done a remarkable job of that, but you've also, and you've used this word in Legenda, you've used the word curated, which I found incredibly accurate almost, because this is a curated journey of sorts. And you've covered this vast swathe of history, you've covered this vast swathe of geography. I'm going to ask you 3 questions about this. And I'm going to ask them slowly. But one, when you've used a structure that you have in Legenda, which is that you are contrasting medieval women with their more modern counterparts in the 18th and 19th centuries, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
2, how are you doing this? So what are the archives you look at? Because you are somebody who enjoys looking at art, archaeology, and literature. So where do you go when you can't find women in text necessarily? And the third one is, who are the women who get left out? How do you pick? How do you say, okay, Isabella of Castile is more important than X?
Yeah, it's awful in a way, isn't it? Because I'm curating history like it's being curated for us. It's okay. So I have a particularly strange way of writing, which my mind works a bit like a spider's web. And often I won't write a word of the book for maybe 6 months, 7 months.
Right.
I'll just read, research, and percolate, and then these strange sort of connections start to form. I also am not a person who makes life easy for themselves. I didn't write one biography about one person. I wrote 7 stories across over 1,000 years of history and across the whole of Europe, stretching out to India.
Yeah.
And I think I see my position as a public historian as I only have one innings in this life. I have
Right.
one chance to make an impact. And I'm going to use every book I have, every opportunity I have to try and do something positive and affirmative. So I don't want to write any old book. I want to write something massive, something epic, something sweeping. And that's what I have done. But my goodness,
yes.
it makes it hard for myself. In terms of curating it, yeah, you're so right. For every one that made it in, there were 10, 15 that couldn't because they just couldn't marry up. Funnily enough, it was finding the modern women that was harder.
Why?
I could find lots and lots of fascinating and inspiring medieval females. But
Why was it harder, though?
In terms of how women have been involved in revolutions and in these moments of carving a nation's identity, the women's stories are totally overwritten. And, I found these extraordinary people like Lakshmi, which we will talk about.
We will talk about
But I also found, naval leaders. You've got Bubalina, who was a naval officer. You've got Charlotte Corday, the angel assassin who kills Marat. You've got, there were a few that were coming through who were sort of making an impact, but it was harder to find them.
Right.
And in terms of leaving them out, there's a trail of amazing, legendary women behind me that I will have to write about in the next book.
And we're talking about overwriting women. I want to quote a line from your book, which was said by Eric Hobsbawm, the historian. And it's such a great quote and it's so relevant. But historians are to nationalism what poppy growers are to heroin addicts. We supply the essential raw material for the market. Right? And I think you could not get a more relevant line. But in a sense, I think history's always been rewritten throughout the centuries. It's been eulogized, there's been sanitization, there's been whitewashing, there's been reinvention in some cases, right?
Yeah.
So in 2026, when we have a book like Legenda, why do we feel the need to look at the subjects that you've chosen?
I mean, isn't that quote just incredible? The Hobsbawm quote was such a springboard for me because I had worked on modern nation building history, but I am a medievalist. It's not my happy space. So I had to kind of start off and really immerse myself in how nations are built. I think we have an idea, don't we, that the nation is perennial. It's just always been there. It is our geography. It is our landscape. It is us. But the process of writing what a nation actually is very curated, controlled, and constantly subject to change.
Also new in a way, right?
Yeah,
we tend
and
to forget
constantly reinventing and reacting. And it's an organism. A nation is an organism that is constantly changing. And when I was reading about how Hobsbawm talks about how historians behave, historians are terrible in as much as they have taken some facts, some ideas about something that happened somewhere in our geographical space from the past, and have turned them into propaganda, turned them into posters of a nation. Yeah. And that's what I was really trying to get to the bottom of with the book. Yeah. Why has this happened to these people? Why has Joan of Arc been constantly returned to and reinvented? What is it about her that meant that every generation has sort of used her and abused her? So that it's still happening now.
No, and I think this comes out so well in this book because, when you just mentioned Joan of Arc, and she's constantly reinvented, as you say, but there's so many other women, Rani Lakshmi Bai here.
Yes.
Right?
Should we talk about her?
100%, because what I've noticed is there's this certain malleability of narrative and imagery throughout this book, with these women being adapted, readapted, almost reinvented over the years. So tell us about how this happened. Pick a couple of women. Let's talk about Rani Lakshmibai first, though.
Yeah, okay, so I have covered an awful lot of time and space in this book, but I start with France and I end up with Britain, which I think is fitting because these are sort of the timeless enemies across a tiny stretch of water. And at the end, I start with Queen Victoria, and I take you to 1857, the Isle of Wight, this tiny little place on the coast of England. And she is in her love palace, Osborne House. She's a young princess. She's with her dear love, Albert, who she's absolutely infatuated with at this stage. And it's his birthday. And they wake up, and it's all very orderly and very Victorian, and the children parade down the staircase and offer gifts up to their father, rather. There's hymns being played. It's all very, very quintessentially English. And he goes to his present table, and there is a metre-high gold statue of a naked woman on a horse, which is not very kind of decent Victorian, you'd have thought. So that's where I started the story. And this woman, this naked woman on the horse, is Lady Godiva, the legend Lady Godiva. And it's a powerful story that's become folklore, really, more than anything, about this medieval woman who, in order to get the people of her town, Coventry, to not have to pay taxes, makes the ultimate sacrifice of her decency by parading on a horse through the streets of Coventry naked. And it's been passed down generation after generation. But I look at Godiva and I uncover that actually she was one of the most powerful, influential, land-owning aristocrats of the early medieval world. There's a really cataclysmic moment in English history, which is the Norman Conquest, 1066, where the whole island is overrun. And in that moment, she is the only woman who survives from the previous dynasty to keep all of her land, to keep all of her power. And I think that is incredible. In the face of war, all-out war and conquest, she stayed up at the top. And yet that entire story of this woman has been reduced to a total fantasy, something that we know never happened, which is that she rode a horse naked through Coventry. So fact and reality are completely separated by centuries of reinterpretation. It's so frustrating. I'm frustrated about it still. But to know that so many of the stories we get passed down to us are not true, that's where I think I came at this as a historian, at this book.
Yeah, because, you've also talked about how women are also recruited to larger nationalist projects as well. Rani Lakshmibai is one. You also had Uta von Bollenstadt in 1930s Germany, who is, representative almost of Nazi ideology and also the basis for the evil queen and Walt Disney's Snow White, right? So tell us a bit about these women. How do they get appropriated over time into larger nationalist momentum? Yeah,
so I closed the book very deliberately with Rani Lakshmibai, and it's because I think she's still such an actively utilised national figure. Stamps and coins and images of her, they are everywhere. And she has been selected when other women who were also fighting in the Indian rebellions, they're not remembered, but why her story? And Western historians have written about her as the Indian Joan of Arc. That's one of the names she gets. And I close the whole book with her because in Coventry today, there is still a Lady Godiva. Her name is Prue Porretta, and she doesn't ride naked through the town, but she does still ride through the town every year. And Coventry today is a very multicultural, diverse place. And she had been working with a selection of women from the Indian subcontinent to tell the stories that seemed to appeal, to echo between Lady Godiva as an inspiring female figure of history and Indian stories that were similarly inspiring. And Rania Jhansi, she becomes sort of this example that ties the two together. And you can see some similarities. One of the most famous images of Lakshmibai is her on the horse, jumping off the fort with the child strapped on, wielding a sword. And in that respect, she is like a Joan of Arc figure. And she's strong and she's powerful. So that whole chapter for me, it was about colonialism, it was about Victorian Empire, it was about Indian desires to be seen as separate from English identities, but through the women. And I think that picking out these legendary women brings so many bigger stories into focus. Yeah, I wish I could write 100 books. I haven't got enough time.
But was there, I mean, we're talking a lot about Lady Godiva, for instance, right? And there's, when you think about Lady Godiva, it's almost, you grew up thinking of that, right? Lady Godiva being naked and the peeping Tom, etc. When you're looking at women like this, did you ever come across stories that felt true to you? Like, this could not possibly be anything else but this. And you brought your training to it and then peeled back the layers to say, okay, fine, there is a real woman behind this.
Yeah, I think... well, I can give you a little bit of context on why I do the work I do. I think, as with all of us, our childhoods are so formative, aren't they? And I've mentioned I'm Polish-Irish. My husband, who is sat in the audience, he is Spanish-Scottish, so we have quite a mix in our children. But being Polish-Irish Catholic in particular, brought up in kind of Catholic households, there was something that was very common, which was saints, figures of the Virgin Mary, and they're always like little icons. And I think, again, in terms of Indian religion, you have the goddess image, the goddess structure. And with these saints, with these goddesses, you have a symbol that means you recognize them, like, oh, you know, there's a wheel, it must be St. Catherine. And that's just one, that's how that individual is always going to be remembered. No context, no detail on whether they were real, what they mean. You might know one or two stories, but then the rest of it is just myth. It's just things that we've been told over and over again. And so I saw a lot of that growing up. I saw a lot of myth making. And also from my own history, my family were obviously involved in World War II. So many of our records were lost. I don't actually have family trees going back. I can't trace my family tree back very far. So most of my personal history is myth. Little stories that my grandmother or my aunties have told me about who I was growing up, who my family were. So I am very aware that this is how we engage with the past as human beings. We're not sat in libraries looking at archives and digging up receipts and things. We are imbuing legends and myths every single day. You walk past a mountain, you tell a story of that mountain, you know, the name of the river, where does it get its name from? These are all legends and myths. And I wanted to see if, as an academic historian, I could actually poke away at those myths and legends and find facts. And in lots of cases I can. And sometimes the facts are more fascinating than the fantasy.
Yeah, and that's so reflected in Legenda because, you know, it's easy to distill history into just queens and empresses and rulers, right? But you've also talked about so many women who were the exact opposite. They were everyday women. They were writers, and they were mystics, and they were, you know, a whole spectrum of women who were not necessarily associated with power.
And also difficult women, problematic women, complicated women. One of the things I try and do in all my work is not just say, the thing that defines us is a binary. Yeah. You're a man, I'm a woman, therefore we are two separate things.
Yeah.
I try and talk about the complexity and the fluidity of all people, men and women, and that isn't often shown in history. It isn't often shown in the past. You know, we tend to have history books, don't we, of the rich, great, powerful men, usually. Yeah. But what about everyone else? What about the workers? What about the people of different ethnicities or different backgrounds? Their stories aren't told either. Yeah. And I think all of those stories come to fruition when you look at the big window of women and their histories. So it's always about finding complexity. And gosh, some of the women in this book some of them are positively unlikable. They're so complicated and difficult.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk. I mean, you brought up difficult women, so I'd really like you to talk about Lola Montez.
Lola Montez.
And also the larger question of, in regard to people like Lola Montez or Isabella of Castile, what happens to these women? Because they're not easy to fit into any particular compartment, right? Do they get demonized? Do they get written out entirely? What part of that complexity gets removed or rewritten first?
Yeah. Well, I think I'd ask the question of everyone in this room. When you define yourself, how do you start off? Do you start off with, I'm a man, I'm a woman? That's sort of an entry-level question. But then you are so much more than that. You are so many layers of things beyond that. And each of these women, they are layers of difficulty and problems. So Lola Montez, amazing example. She is there in the heart of it all as Germany is going from this like weird collection of states into what we now see on a map as Germany. And she is a Irish dancer. That's how she starts out. But she realizes there is a market for Spanish dancers, exotic Spanish dancers. So she develops this weird dance called the spider dance. And the idea is that she's wearing these reams of material and dresses, and a spider has got up inside, an imaginary spider has got up inside her dress. So she has to shake it out. So think a little bit like a can, but it's quite I think it would have been quite a strange dance to sit through. But she becomes essentially a celebrity. She travels the world, she performs on the stage, and in this celebrity, she manages to catch the attention of the king, Ludwig of Germany. Yeah. And he becomes obsessed with her. But Lola is difficult because Lola loves a fight. She incites riots everywhere she goes. When she incited one riot, that wasn't enough. She went back to her apartment, got a pistol, went back into the streets and incited another riot. So she's a revolutionary in the truest sense. But she's a problem, isn't she? She whips people she doesn't like, she's rude, she's abrasive, she's difficult, but she's brilliant at the same time.
And even then you had caricatures of her, with a whip and a crown and holding King Ludwig I on a dog's leash. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. So she had ultimate power over the king. And there's the sorts of stories that we don't get passed down and told. So in answer to your question, what happens is if a woman in history is problematic, one way to deal with them is just to write them out completely. I mean, let's remember, books. We are at a book festival, a literary festival. A book is an incredibly precious and valuable, but very vulnerable object. Books can be burnt, books can be lost, books can be edited. People's names can be scratched through. You can exist in time and then stop existing in time because somebody has decided they don't want your story to carry on. And that is what I try and do in my work, is say, can we find them? And I use all sorts of evidence, archaeology, art. I love going to physical places where I know a historical person has been, touching the wall and connecting with them through the place. But we have our names written into history for such a split second, and it is so vulnerable. And I think with people like Lola, even in her lifetime, she was deeply unpopular. So people were writing out her story while she's still alive. And then for other figures, maybe they become less relevant, more relevant. Some of the legends, like Isabella of Castile, the Queen of Spain, her story gets used to prop up a fascist regime later on down the line. So certain figures can prove to be more or less useful across time. But we are all vulnerable of this. None of us know what will come after us. We only know what we're living through in the moment, and how our stories will be written down, I think is important for me as a historian to look at how people have done that across time.
Yeah, and since we're talking about vulnerability, I want you to talk about the body as cultural and sexual background through time and through various itinerations of these women's lives. When we're talking about Lady Godiva, for instance, we're remembering her naked. There's an element of voyeurism almost, right? When we're talking about Charlotte Corday, there's this like grisly thing of when she's decapitated and the executioner slaps her.
They slap her decapitated head.
Yeah, and when we're talking about Catherine of Siena, you know, she's not whole even in death. There are two parts of her. Her head and a finger are in Siena, and the rest of her is in Rome. So how do we look at that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the human body, I think, doesn't get talked about enough. We talk about a name, we talk about achievements, we talk about dates. We don't talk about the physical essence of a human being. And I don't know if it's because so many of the women I write about do seem to have quite an extreme relationship with their physical bodies. And I don't think it's an exclusively female thing. I think, you know, we could tell stories about male bodies as well. But in terms of the women you've highlighted there, it's quite shocking how their bodies suffer in their lifetime, but also are treated after death. So the Charlotte Corday story is a really dramatic one. She makes the decision to kill, as she says, she would kill one man to save 100,000. So she goes to the home of the writer, the politician, Marat, and she stabs him in the bathtub. And it's a very famous image of he's bleeding in the bathtub. She then gets immediately arrested and she is executed for the assassination. And they cannot believe that a woman, a modern woman, could do something like as brutal as stab a man. So they think she must have a man or a team of men who have seduced her, who are behind the scenes, because goodness knows a woman couldn't possibly have the agency to do that herself. And they really don't believe that she's acting alone. And so right up to her execution, she is treated as a criminal. She's treated with disrespect. And when her head is lifted after being guillotined, the executioner slaps her around the face. And it's really insulting. And then her body is examined to see if she was intact because they believed she had a lover who must have seduced her. So her body is being violated at every single moment and beyond. And with Catherine of Siena, it's even worse, of course, because the Christian church has a terrible habit of chopping up the bodies of people they think are amazing, saints, and then taking bits of their bodies to different places. And dear Catherine, her head, her mummified head, is still in a box in Siena, her hometown, whereas the rest of her body is in Rome. And then fingers, toes, bits of hair, skin, they're all over the place. And so again, her body has been ripped up, torn apart, used, and wheeled out. You know, her head has become a symbol of Italian nationalism. And her head is paraded down the streets of Siena every year. So this poor medieval woman's head has become a symbol of that.
And
some lovely sounds.
Sorry about that.
Dramatic accompaniment.
No, I wanted to stay on this a bit because, you know, there's so much complexity here as well. When we're looking back, it's not just a physical sort of erasure or a physical debasement. There's also this perception of a Madonna versus, a temptress. The stage is not the word, is not the place for the other word, but a Madonna versus a temptress. You know, you have that idea, particularly in Germany, of the perfect German woman with Adelaide of Burgundy.
Yes.
Right. So that sort of gets a binary. I want to say. I don't know if that's the right word. What do you feel?
I think we still live with it, don't we? I am a working woman. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am expected in the modern world to do everything and do it well. That is an awful lot of pressure for anybody. And I think that, when we're looking at how women have been categorized in the past, I think it's very similar. It would be lovely, and I think historians have said, this woman is a temptress, this woman is a witch, this woman is a genius, this woman is awful, and sort of categorize them simply as being one thing or another. But all of them are a sort of mix, a meld of lots of different things. Yeah. And I'm trying to show that in the book. I think they come through as incredibly identifiable people. When I think about Isabella of Castile, she is a problematic person, but you can follow her life and you can see how in our own lifetime she changes, she shifts the focus of her power. And so, yeah, I think that the women are more than just the terms that they're reduced to. These women are showing that across time they've always been complicated.
And you've also mentioned that, in your opinion, you felt that the medieval women have a lot more agency than their modern counterparts in the 18th and 19th centuries. Why is that?
I think it might come as a surprise because we think, don't we, that history is about progress and that with every generation we make progress upon what's gone before. But in many ways, particularly with the rights of women, they have declined. Women around the turn of the millennium, about the year 1000, had more agency and power than women in the 19th century. That had reduced. And I think that's a shocking way to feel about it. But I would think, we are now hopefully reaching a time where women can regain some of their agency.
That's a fantastic note on which to sort of open this up to the audience, because I've been signaled off stage that it's now time for questions. So if there are questions in the audience.
I can see a hand up at the back there, just behind.
So I was just wondering, the Godiva chocolate and Godiva that you were mentioning, is there some resemblance? The Godiva chocolate?
Sir, if you could repeat that, the audio is a little bad.
Okay. Godiva chocolates, the symbolism on that, is it inspired from Godiva that you were mentioning?
I missed the top bit. Oh, Godiva chocolates. Excellent. Sorry, it's hard to hear from up here. Yes, well done. It is named after her, yes. Godiva has spawned so many things because, just as we were discussing, she's become known as this legendary nude, which is unfair because in her lifetime she wouldn't have been a nude, but it's very much an idea of the idealized woman, Not only is she ideally beautiful, she has this luscious hair that kind of covers her modesty as she rides through town, but she's the perfect leader. She's going to do this thing for her people, a sacrifice for her. And because it comes round every year as well, she's become a symbol of civic pride, the pride of a town in their leader. And she's still bedded into the streets of the funny little town of Coventry. I love Coventry, but you can see her, Godiva Street, but you can see where the palace that she founded is underneath the foundations, the cathedral, the church she founded. She's still there in the fabric of the city. And Godiva chocolates was part of this Victorian obsession with her. And again, I was saying earlier, in order to set up talking about the Rani of Jhansi, that this pivotal year, 1857, which is when she dies, but it's also when Queen Victoria gives her gift of the naked statue to her husband. It's an important year because in Victorian England, everything is becoming really traditional. And women are in the home. Women are in the domestic sphere. This is where the emergence of the two spheres begins. Men are in the public sphere. Women are in the domestic sphere, the private sphere. And Lady Godiva becomes this icon of perfection. She can be everything. She can be just about outside, just being amazing inside too. She kind of covers all the bases. And that's why when Victoria gave Albert that statue, I think she was trying to say to him, I'm your ideal wife too. I'm perfect. Yes, I'm queen, but I'm very, very domesticated. I'm very enamored with you. So every time a Godiva chocolate, I think, is given originally, it was given with that intention of the perfect kind of romantic ideal of a woman. Brilliant question. Thank you. There's a question in the middle here.
The gentleman in the middle.
In the middle, just on the aisle.
How does one engage with history so that one understands the truth and facts instead of falling for the propaganda? And can there be an objective like truth when history is supposed to be like reinterpreted, or like it is reinterpreted into myths and stories anyway? So how does one differentiate and how does one engage with it?
Yes. Sorry, again, I can't hear it very well.
How does one engage with different versions of history if it's been reinvented?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sorry. How do we engage with different periods of history as it's changing is what you're asking. Yeah. So this is a great and important point because it's changing constantly, isn't it? And we are in a period of such dramatic change in terms of ideologies and opinions. So I'd say the major changes that happened, say, 50, 60 years ago was the rise of feminism, socialism, those big isms that sort of said, all these groups of people have been ignored by history. How do we talk about them? And now we've lived through a fracturing of that, and it's become about points of meeting. We have the internet now. If you are one person in one part of the world who has a niche interest, something that you want to find out about, you can find someone on the other side of the globe that shares that interest. We never could do that before. Our communities survived because we kind of made groups and pulled together. But now it's all fractured, and in that is a whole load of new ways of thinking and engaging with the past. And this is why your question is so important. It means we're having to reassess so much as we go forward, doesn't it? So men and women are having to grapple on a very serious level with how women have been treated in the past. And I think this is a shared concern, a shared thing we journey on together. But it's also not about blame. We can't go back and change what happened. We just have to educate and move forward and find ways that are more inclusive, find connection points that mean that the conversations keep happening. And that's really what I try to do in my work. I don't want anyone to feel that what's happened in the past villainizes them or it's something that they should feel guilt or shame. Of course, there should be acknowledgement of the pain caused, but it's about moving forward positively. And I think that comes through understanding, education. It comes through lots of conversations with people who know more about these fields, and compassion, love and compassion for one another. So thank you. It's a great question.
Thank you. And it's also a great note on which to end this conversation because we are completely out of time. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. Thank you, Janina. This was a wonderful conversation. Janina will be signing books if anyone wants to buy it, which I strongly encourage you all to.
Thank you for an amazing session. Thank you, everyone.